All right, hello. Thank you, and welcome to Reverend Matt's Monster Science. As usual, our front of show uh, pointers are that I will not be able to see the chat during the piece. So if there's anything you want to say to me, just make sure you say it to me at the end. Talk amongst yourselves in the meantime. Have a nice time, but I just won't be able to see it. And so if you want me to, just wait. And I would love if you could donate. There's a button right below the screen, and I'm Matthew Kessen, Kessen on Venmo. And tonight is the third of a trilogy of shows that was originally ordered by the Norway House, a lovely little gallery and gathering space in uh, in South Minneapolis. And so they have been promoting this show as well. And so if you would like to donate and you were sent here by the Norway House, please say that in the comment section when you donate. There's always a little comment section when you donate. Just let me know that you were sent by the Norway House so we can kind of get a gauge of where people are coming from. So thank you very much. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Reverend Matt, and today we're going to discuss the giants and trolls of Norse mythology and legend. This is actually the third part of a trilogy of talks about monsters in old Scandinavian stories. The first was about the giant animals of the grand old myths of the gods, and the second one was about the weird forest and water people and creatures from more recent folklore. But this one is just about great big people. The Northern Europeans were into great big people. They couldn't shut up about them. You'd ask them to recommend a local florist, and they'd somehow work giants into the answer. And why they would put such emphasis on this motif is difficult to say. Though, speaking as a 6'7" person myself, I do feel that their love and respect for colossal people was simply because they were very sensible. I promised myself one joke tonight about how I myself am a giant. There it was. I hope you have all enjoyed it. Now, of course, the Scandinavians were not the only people to make up giants. As we mentioned in the first part of this trilogy, giants are one of the few truly ubiquitous themes in world storytelling. And this is thought to be because every single living human spends the most important learning and developmental period of their life in the company of people who are much, much bigger than them and hold the keys to life and death. I suppose some people don't. People who are raised by wolves. Why is it always wolves that raise people when it's not humans? Why isn't anyone raised by pangolins? I bet they have some pretty good parenting techniques. Anyway, the point is, giants are a folkloric memory of our own parents. This perhaps explains why they vary so much everywhere. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, though it is very common that they were here before us and need to be overcome so that we can do things our way. And sometimes, particularly in the Norse stories, it is the gods that have to do that overcoming. And interestingly, there is a school of thought that the idea of gods generally is also a memory of early childhood, an idea of power and authority and guardianship that ought to be followed and adored. And so when gods fight giants, it is as though our love and our fear for our parents are battling it out symbolically. Also, in many of these stories, the giants are dispatched by being hit with a blunt object by a man who is very strong, so you can get as deeply symbolic or otherwise as you like, really. Of course, as we will see, it's not all conflict. The giants and the gods are often attracted to each other and even intermarry, and it often seems like the only difference between the giants and the gods is that the giants aren't individually in charge of anything, like thunder or mischief or cookies. Maybe the gods are as big as giants, but they just don't lead with that on their resumes. You wonder sometimes what Andre the Giant must have thought about it. Why not Andre the Philanthropist or Andre who gives great back massages? But then sometimes it is made specific that the giants are much larger than the Aesir being the Norse gods, or most of them. And so when they intermarry, maybe it's just because some people are attracted to weird things. Honestly, if I met a 50-foot woman, I'd probably be like, hey. And then she'd crush me like an insect. That's okay. It's what I would have wanted. The Norse myth makers were so into giants that we have in fact seen some of them already in this series. So let's recap those briefly. At the beginning of all things, there were two realms, Niflheim and Muspel, realms of ice and fire, respectively. Muspel is sometimes called Muspelheim, which basically means Muspel Land, which sounds like an amusement park, which would presumably just be an enormous inferno, and that doesn't sound like a super good business model, but then weirder things have made money. At the border between the ice and the fire, a giant came into being called Ymir, who then butted off other giants, and eventually Odin, Vili, and V, the first of the Aesir, who killed Ymir and made the world out of his corpse, and everything there is was made out of a great big dude, which just seems unsettling, frankly. While all this was going on, Muspel, the fire realm, was being guarded by the lord of the fire giants, Surtur, in case anyone wanted to invade all the fire. Not the kind of job you take to make your day go by quickly, but things will get exciting for Surtur a little later. We also have heard already about the giant Hymir, who had a fishing contest with Thor, during which the god of thunder almost landed Jormungand, the colossal serpent that encircles the entire earth, and whose removal from the ocean would have more or less destroyed the earth. So Hymir cut Thor's fishing line, and so Thor killed him with his hammer. And sometimes you kind of lose sight of who you're supposed to root for in these stories. Of course, if our current president decided to lay the earth to ruin with a planet-sized snake, he certainly wouldn't lose any followers. It would certainly stick it to the libs. And we also have heard of an unnamed giant who almost tricked the Aesir into giving him the sun and the moon and Freya, the goddess of love, in marriage by building them a wall very quickly, until he was undone by the shape-shifting trickster god Loki seducing his horse. Yes, that's what it says, seducing his horse. Religion, everybody. And talking of Loki, we have heard of a number of offspring of the giants. He sired with the giantess Angerboda, the aforementioned Jormungand, as well as the gigantic wolf Fenrir and the Batman villain prototype Hel. None of these are giants, obviously, nor was Loki himself considered to be one, even though in some tellings of his stories, he himself was the offspring of giants. And indeed, he was no bigger or stronger than the Aesir among whom he lived, and between this and the Snake, Wolf, and Harvey Dent siblings, you'd swear that the Norse people didn't understand about basic genetic theory. That's ridiculous, though. They had to have. Loki, well, most of us are familiar with Loki thanks to a series of movies about unusually dressed people having conflicts among remarkably clear ethical lines, culminating in space handwear. The mythic Loki is not Thor's adopted brother, though, but rather the blood brother of Odin, the king of the gods, the All-Father. One imagines there is a story about how this came to pass in the first place, but it has not survived. Presumably, given the nature of Loki's stories, he tricked his way into it. But it gave him his place in Asgard, the home of the Aesir, and guaranteed that no matter how much nonsense he came up with, he got to stay there. Up to a point. One thing that the movies are more or less right about is that sometimes Loki helps Thor out, and then other times he's a mass murderer. He's never trustworthy, is Loki, but otherwise things vary. Another thing they get wrong is that Loki is described in the old Eddas, the stories of Norse mythology written down by Christian monks in the 12th century, as being very handsome, whereas, of course, nobody finds Tom Hiddleston attractive. Poor man. The Norns were also sometimes described as offspring of the giants, or at least the three main ones were. The Norns in general were female entities that were set over the concept of fate, appearing at births to foretell the fate of the babe and sometimes acting as guardian spirits through their lives. And as such, there were human Norns and Norns for the Alfar, the elves, and so forth. But the ones for the gods were said to be maidens of the giant race. They were named Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, and some interpretations have taken these names to refer to past, present, and future, and other interpretations have been all like, nuh-uh, and the study of the Norns names what actually might have meant We could go on for a full hour debating it. There is enough data to do that. And if you want me to do that, no, you don't. It was said that the Aesir in the early days had a golden age of constant bliss and timelessness until the Norns showed up and set events into motion, events as a concept, destinies and adventures and such. And the moral of that is that if there's one thing that ruins everything, it's sequence, cause and effect. It sucks when things happen. Anything. One of the first things that happened was that the Aesir went to war with another group of gods, the Vanir, which is thought to be a set of stories symbolically describing the assimilation of a neighboring group of local gods into the Vikings' main pantheon. The beginning of this war is not always described, but when it is, one version goes like this. One of the Vanir, called Frey, was visiting Asgard from the world of the Vanir, Vanaheim, and he snuck off at one point to sit on Hlidskjalf. Let me look at that again. Hlidskjalf, yep, that's right. The throne that All-Father Odin would sit on that enabled him to look anywhere in the 9 worlds of Norse myth. Frey looked around for a while and finally settled on Jotunheim, the world of the giants, Jotun meaning giant in Old Norse. And there he saw a beautiful, beautiful young giant woman, so lovely that she seemed to radiate light, and he was immediately hopelessly love-struck. So what's happened here is that some dude had a tool to bring unlimited knowledge to him, and he used it to look at girls. Plausible enough at any time in history, and now that we have the internet, provable. They only leave out the part where he used the throne of Odin to look at cats. And also, this is, of course, one of the countless old stories in which a man takes one look at a woman and is in love with her, capital I, capital L, because he can tell by the quality of her cheekbones or some such that they have many shared interests and compatible and complementary methods of problem solving as partners. But I digress. Frey went home and was inconsolable for days, until finally his father Njord, god of seafarers, summoned Frey's sidekick Skirnir, one of the Alfar, the elves. Njord told Skirnir that the world was beginning to die as Frey mooned about, as Frey was the god of nature and agriculture and stuff like that, and somebody therefore ought to do something about it, and that somebody was going to be Skirnir. So Skirnir went to Frey and found out what was up, and Frey told the elf that he must go and win the giantess for him, because women love it when strangers send their servants to ask them to back that thing up. Frey gave Skirnir his magical sword, which moved and fought in the air all by itself and defended its wielder from all attacks. And Skirnir also had a problem, though, which was that the castle where the giantess's father lived was surrounded by an enormous wall of fire. So, Frey told him to steal Odin's horse Sleipnir, who had 8 legs and could leap over any obstacle. Also, he could fly, which is even better than jumping over things, but this is one of the stories where he just jumps. Anyway, Skirnir said K and did all that, and finally arrived at the castle of Gymir, father of Frey's beloved, who was named Gerd. Skirnir started off by offering Gymir great riches. How much for your daughter, he basically said, which was the way things sometimes went in those days, but that doesn't make it not gross. Gymir rejected all offers, though, as he was already very wealthy, and apparently one of the ways that giants are psychologically different from humans is that they are capable of thinking that they have enough money. Skirnir then went on to promises of coercion, saying that he would cut off Gerd's head if she did not come with him, and then that he had a magic wand that would enchant her into coming with him against her will. But Gerd and her father remained unmoved. Well, said Skirnir, I am here to make you fall in love with someone you have never seen, and I've tried bribery, and I've tried threats, and frankly, I am out of ideas. What would you like? That sword, said Gymir. I want that sword. And Skirnir had no choice but to hand it over. And so Gerd went with Skirnir and married Frey, and everything was apparently great. Ah, except for a couple of things. Odin was not entirely thrilled about the theft of his horse, and he was especially peevish about the loss of Frey's sword to the giants. It was a sword of some legend meant to be a great asset at Ragnarok, the prophesied end of the world, which Odin was obsessed with preventing or winning. Moreover, in one version of this story, Gerd's mother was Angerboda, the giant witch who, in every version of these myths, is the mother of Jormungand, Fenrir, and Hel. And she hadn't given birth to them yet, but she was still widely regarded as a witch and bad news. So the Aesir decided that this had all been her fault. So they did what any sensible adults would do, which was burn her alive. This didn't work. She lived. So they burned her alive again. And this didn't work again, so they burned her alive a third time because apparently they couldn't think of anything else. Loki is often thought of as the cleverest of the gods, but it doesn't seem to have been much of a race. Loki was basically the only god who wasn't a complete ignoramus. This third time it did work, though, so Loki secretly swallowed Angerboda's charred and blackened heart because sometimes an idea just comes to you and you run with it. And he snuck off into the woods, where their union gave birth to Fenrir the wolf, the first of their offspring. And a lot of parents dread their small children asking them where babies come from for the first time, but in the Northlands they had a much bigger problem. Anyway, Frey was then like, say, that is my mother-in-law, and the Aesir were like, well, nuts to you, and things kind of escalated, and the Aesir and the Vanir went to war. This went on for a while until it became apparent that the two sides were too evenly matched, and so at last a truce was arranged, which included an exchange of deities to go live in the other's realms. The Aesir sent Mimir and Honir to Vanaheim, and the Vanir sent Frey, his sister Freya, and their father Njord to Asgard, and hooray for everything. To seal the alliance, the Aesir and the Vanir all spit into a pot. As the meeting ended, Odin and Frey and Freya decided it would be amazing if they just. Terribly sorry. Odin and Freya decided that it would be a shame to just throw out all that perfectly good saliva. I'm not making this up. And so instead, they fashioned it into a man, because when the gods have ideas, they have ideas. So they did, and named him Kvasir, and soon learned that he had all knowledge and all wisdom, and that he could answer any question in a learned and insightful manner. Questions like, is there a second way to kill someone other than burning them alive? Kvasir hung around Asgard for a while answering questions, and then decided to travel the worlds for a while, which he did until before too long some dwarves murdered him and drained out all of his blood and used it to brew a mead that conferred upon the drinker poetic inspiration and genius. And the part of this story where bodily fluids are used to produce surprising things has now come to an end, alas. So, the dwarves spent a little while getting loaded every night and telling each other and nobody else some poems, and I have been to some poetry slams, and that is about right. Then one day they were visited by the giant Gilling and his wife. The reason for the visit is unrecorded. Maybe they went to college together. Gilling and the dwarves went out in the dwarves' rowboat, where the giant fell into the water and drowned. Um, the dwarves, Galar and Fjalar, by the way, left him there to drown because they were the sort of people who killed people to use their blood for microbrews. They went home and told his wife that he drowned, and she began to wail, which they didn't like, so they bashed her head in with a rock. Well, everything was going pretty great for Galar and Fjalar right about then, and deservedly so, until the morning when they woke up in their boat, out in their water, steered by a giant they didn't recognize. He introduced himself as Suttung, the son of Gilling, and he put them still tied up on a rock as the tide came in a manner that the tide would overcome and drown them. This giant was also offered riches and, again, didn't want them, but instead wanted a magic item, once again, in this case, the mead of poetry. The dwarves had a little choice, and they handed it over. Well, finally, Odin got wind of this, as he got wind of a great many things, either via his throne or his two ravens, here seen on a barbecue, named Hugin and Munin, Thought and Memory, whom he sent out each day to bring him back news of the world that night. Odin thought for a bit. He was himself a cunning god much of the time, and he soon announced that he would be leaving Asgard to walk the world in disguise, which was a thing that he did quite a lot. He brought with him Asgard's finest whetstone and its finest auger. Not this one, this is just a normal auger. And he instructed the other Aesir to construct 3 huge wooden vats just inside the gates of Asgard. He didn't tell them why, but honestly, even after just having heard as much about Asgard as we have already tonight, I think we've learned that a lot of unexpected things and maybe tend to happen, and maybe just roll with it. Odin went to the farm of Suttung's brother Baugi and approached Baugi's 9 slaves in the fields, themselves giants, reaping the crops with giant scythes. It's a pity your scythes are so blunt, he said, and the giants got all defensive because you've got to take pride in something, and sometimes that something is your farming tools. So Odin took out the whetstone of the gods. Everything of the gods was something of the gods. The ottoman of the gods, the used toilet paper roll of the gods. You've just got to expect it to be better than your stuff. And he sharpened their scythes, and they tried them, and boy, they were extra sharp now. So they all wanted to buy the whetstone, but Odin told them it would be more fun if he threw it in the air and whoever caught it could keep it. Well, that did sound pretty fun. Giants knew how to party. So Odin threw it in the air, and the giants all went with it with their free hands, forgetting about their other hands with their now supernaturally sharp scythes in them. And if you haven't predicted what happened next, then you are probably a person with a gentle heart, and I hope the people around you value that. So Odin stepped over their corpses and proceeded to the house of Baugi, where he said it was a shame about the farm hands, but that he could do the work of 9 giants, and so why don't you take him as a farm hand? In exchange, he just wants a taste of your brother's mead. Well, every part of this was obviously incredibly weird, but Baugi knew he was in a Norse myth, so he threw up his hands and said, "Sure, okay." And so Odin worked Baugi's farm for a season, handling all of its chores skillfully and single-handedly, and obviously playing the long game here. So, at the end of the harvest, he and Baugi went to Suttung, and Baugi asked him for some of his mead. Suttung, who had not been apprised of any of this, said no. So, Odin went home and was sad. The end. No. Instead, he suggested that the two of them play a little trick on Suttung, so off they went to the mountain Hneitbjorg, which had a cave inside it in which the mead was being stored. Odin, still in disguise, gave Baugi his very high-quality auger and asked him to drill into the mountain. Baugi did this for a while and announced that he had broken through. So Odin blew into the hole, and dust and stone shavings blew back out at him. "I have learned 2 things," said Odin, "and one is that you haven't broken through yet." "What's the other?" said Baugi, but Odin wouldn't say, and so with his finely honed just-go-with-it skills, Baugi kept drilling. He announced that he was through again, and again Odin blew, and nothing blew back out this time. But at the same time, he felt a shadow falling across his back. "The second thing I learned," said Odin, "is that you would lie to me and betray me." And so he turned into a snake and slid down the hole. And so Baugi left the story, which was probably the best thing for him. Odin slithered down into the cave where the 3 vats of mead were. Sun, Bodin, and Odrerir. Those were the names of the vats. Everything has names in these stories. It is very weird. And they were guarded by Gunnlod, a giantess and Suttung's daughter. So Odin once again took human form, this time super handsome, and approached her. She, of course, accused him of being there for the mead, but he assured her that he was, in fact, there just to look upon her. And they chatted for a little while and eventually made love, because Odin was wise and powerful in war and evidently very smooth. Afterward, he cried and told Gunnlod that this was because he wished he could describe her beauty, but if only he could have the tiniest sip from one of the vats, perhaps then he would gain the poetry to manage it. Gunnlod wasn't into it, so they chatted some more, went at it again, and then he was sad again, as before, only now naming a different one of the vats, And then this whole thing again a third time. And what Norse mythology wants us to know is that if something doesn't work, then do it again exactly the same way 2 more times. Which of course worked here. And Gunnlod gave Odin access to the vats, and he drank the entirety of their contents, right up, one by one. Gunnlod would have killed him on the spot, but he did what any of us would have done in that situation, turned into an eagle and shot towards Asgard. Gunnlod wailed her fury, and her father heard, and himself turned into an eagle and gave chase. Faster and faster they flew, one giant eagle right at the tail of the other, until at last Odin flew over the gate of Asgard and vomited the mead of poetry into the 3 prepared vats. Just as he did so, that he got Suttung off his tail by farting out a remnant of the mead into the giant eagle's face. And this is the story of where bad poetry comes from. Again, religion, everybody. Anyway, taken as a whole, that is the story of the origin of poetry. You probably kind of figured. Giants became eagles more often than you'd think, really. Once Thor and Loki were traveling through the mountains, and they killed a giant ox, but no matter how long they roasted it, it just wouldn't cook. And then they saw a giant eagle and asked for its help because it probably has some pretty good ideas. The eagle said that there was probably a spell on the ox and that he could lift it in exchange for a portion of it. They agreed. And he did, and then he took most of the ox off for himself, which made Loki so angry that he buried his spear in the eagle's back. So the eagle took off, with Loki in tow, unable to let go of his spear due to magic, and you said taking the Gorilla Glue spell at 3rd level was a bad idea. The eagle told Loki that he would dash the trickster against the rocks unless he brought the eagle the golden apples of immortality, which were kept by the goddess Idun and distributed among the Aesir from time to time to keep them young. Loki had no choice but to swear to get them for the eagle, who was, by the way, a giant named Thiazi in eagle form. And once again, what giants want is magic items, and they refuse to get them by killing bugbears like decent people would. So, back in Asgard, Loki lured Idun into the woods, and Thiazi, still in eagle form, carried her off to his castle. Very soon, the Aesir began to age, and very soon after that, they began to blame Loki, which was, of course, correct, and demanded that he fix this. So he borrowed Freya's cloak that lets its user take the shape of a falcon and flew to Thiazi's castle, turned Idun and her apples into a nut, and hastened back to Asgard with them. Thiazi saw and took eagle form and gave chase, but just as Loki flew over the wall of Asgard, Thor set fire to some wood shavings they had put just inside the wall, and a column of flame burst up, killing Thiazi instantly. And that, with the bad poetry farting, was pretty gross, but Suttung got off easy in the end, frankly. Thiazi spends almost all of his time in this story as a giant eagle, pausing only long enough to have to turn into an eagle again. And so one wonders why this character wasn't just a giant eagle generally. What, would that have been weird? Maybe it was important that he was a giant so that when his giant daughter then showed up, that would make sense, but we have already determined that Asgardian genetics tended to be sort of freewheeling. But show up she did, demanding restitution, and so the gods promised her 3 things. 1, that they would get her a husband, because that, of course, is the only thing that women actually want. 2, that they ensure that Thiazi would always be remembered. And 3, that they make her laugh. They told Scotty, that was her name, that she could have her pick of gods for a husband, except she could only select them as they stood behind a curtain with only their feet visible. Obviously very reasonable, that's basically how it works, but having no other criteria of foot judgment, she selected the god with the cleanest feet, which she took to be Balder, the most beautiful of the gods, but who turned out to be Njord, the sailor's god, so funny on her. They immortalized her father by throwing his jewel eyes. He had jewel eyes, some versions of the story mention that early on, and some do not, into the sky as stars. And they made her laugh, by tying one end of a rope to a goat's beard and the other to Loki's genitals, and then having Loki tug on the rope with his hand, causing the goat to tug back and Loki to howl in pain. And this, of course, made her laugh. This made everyone laugh. I've been in comedy for a number of years, and this is what you call your A material. And also, once again, religion, everybody. Another time, Thor and Loki were traveling, along with Thor's human manservant Thialfi, when they came upon the castle of Utgard Loki, the giant. He lived in Utgard and was named Loki, no relation. Apparently, a lot of people were named Loki. It was the Norse John Smith. They were welcomed and told that this was a castle in which all occupants and visitors were exceptional people, and so the travelers must prove themselves to be the same. In some castles, being actual gods would fit this bill, but Utgard Loki had some standards, and so he challenged each of them to a contest of their own choosing. Loki chose an eating contest because he was about cleverness and tricks, but he also had other interests. So they brought in a long wooden trough full of food and put Loki on one end and a giant named Logi on the other, and away they went. They met right in the middle, but Logi had not only eaten the food but the trough as well, and so the contest went to him. Then Thialfi chose a foot race, and he raced the giant Hugi and lost. Then he raced them 2 more times, and on the second and third times, still lost. He tried the same thing 3 times, and it still didn't work. Well, this impossible upsetting of the natural order of the universe itself was obviously pretty demoralizing. But now it was Thor's turn, and he didn't know the meaning of the word demoralizing. He didn't know the meaning of a lot of words, actually. Restraint, for one of them, he chose 3 different tests. The first was a test of drinking. He was given an immense drinking horn and told that no giant there ever needed more than 2 pulls to drain that horn dry. And so Thor drank. And he drank, and he drank, and he drank, and he thought it tasted awfully salty, but he lowered the level of the drink not a bit. He then took a longer drink, and then unthinkably a third, still longer one. This was essentially a breath-holding test. Warrior cultures are super impressed by breath-holding. And he was unable to lower the drink's level by more than a thumb's width. Bloodied but not unbowed, Thor went on to his second test, lifting Utgard Loki's cat. And he lifted and lifted and lifted, but he could not lift up the cat, getting no more than one of its feet off the ground. Thor and Loki and Thialfi conferred. They agreed that things were going badly, but certainly that nothing strange was going on here. No. And so it was on to the third test. I made that part up. As we saw with the cat, Utgard Loki was now just openly insulting his guests, and so he brought forth Ellie, his aged foster mother, to wrestle Thor. Thor struggled mightily and, once again, lost. Beaten, the travelers were nevertheless fed and allowed to spend the night, and the next morning Utgard Loki himself escorted them to the edge of his domain. Once there, "You want to hear something hilarious?" he said to them. "As hilarious as tying your genitals to a goat?" they asked. "Well, for God's sake, not that hilarious," Utgard Loki replied. And he told them that he had tricked them, that they had been the victims of magic illusions. Firstly, Logi, who had out-eaten Loki, had been wildfire incarnate, devouring everything in its path. Secondly, Hugi, the runner, had been thought itself, which is super hard to beat in a foot race. The drinking horn had been connected to the very ocean, and Thor had lowered it, and also apparently forgotten the difference of the taste between mead and seawater, but whatever. Later, by the way, this would be the origin of the tides. The cat had been Jormungand, the world serpent, and all the giants had been terrified by how far Thor had, in fact, lifted him. And Ellie had been old age incarnate, to whom even the gods must succumb. And so the gods had been tricked. "Ha ha, good one," they said. "Never come to my house again. You people are terrifying," said Utgard Loki. It's a fun story, but one of the bothersome things about it is the names. All of these illusory giants are straight up named what they are. Logi means wildfire. Eli means old age. Hugi means thoughts. He also Odin's raven Hugin, also specifically meaning thought. And here the gods are being mystified by their defeats. The Asgard educational system just needs something about critical thinking skills, is all. Thor looms large in this story, in some part because he was a very great enemy of the giants. Indeed, in stories where Thor is absent, he is said to be off murdering giants, the adorable little scamp. But then, of course, there are lots of stories where we get to watch him do this. The Norse loved Thor, and they loved his violence. I know things have seemed pretty highbrow so far. In one of the most famous of these stories, Thor wakes up one morning to find that his hammer Mjolnir has been stolen. It's not like in the comics and the movies, anyone can pick up Mjolnir. It's still pretty sweet when Captain America does it, though, in the Eddas. Loki soon enough finds out that it had been done by the hideous giant Thrym, and Thrym demands Freya's hand in marriage within 8 days for the return of the hammer. Freya is frankly getting tired of this by this point, and honestly, it probably wasn't all that great even at first, and so she flatly refuses. The other gods try to talk her into it, into marrying a hideous giant so that Thor can have his hammer back, but persuasive though that is, she is unmoved. So Loki hatches a plan, which is another one of the reasons they keep him around. He does do that a good bit. They will dress up Thor as a bride and present him to Freya. And then when he gets close enough, wham! Thor is against this, but the gods are all for it. All the other ones are. Maybe one of them suggested that the huge, beefy Thor wouldn't look much like Freya even in a dress and a veil, but then somebody presumably reminded that person that everybody in the world was a complete idiot. So, they dressed Thor up, and Loki shape-changed into a handmaiden and advised Thor to let him do the talking, and off they all went. Arriving at Thrym's castle, giants just had castles automatically. They exuded them from their pores. They sat down for a feast in Thor Freya's honor, Loki sitting in between Thrym and Thor in case the giant got handsy. Thor immediately ate all of the boars and salmon and such put on the table. Thrym remarked to Loki the handmaiden about this, and Loki told Thrym that Freya had been so excited about the wedding for the last several days that she hadn't been able to eat. Later, Thrym tried to sneak a kiss and raised Thor's veil, but dropped it when he saw Thor's red, bloodshot eyes. Again, inquiring with the handmaiden, he was told that Freya had been so excited about the wedding for the last several days that she hadn't been able to sleep. This all was good enough for Thrym, because sometimes men just believe that women are wildly attracted to them for no reason whatsoever. No, seriously, they are. Finally, it was time for the wedding. They brought out Mjolnir to swear the vows upon, which was probably improvised, because that totally is not what Mjolnir is for. Well, now Thor was next to Mjolnir, and what happened next was an unexpected and nuanced twist to the story. Or he took the hammer and killed every single giant there completely dead. It's the second one. Now, obviously, this is a hilarious story about a man being forced to dress like a woman, and that's super funny, and also he hates it. What could be worse and more comedy gold than emasculation when emasculinity is the only thing that's good? Now, note indeed that this all starts with Thor's hammer being taken away from him. His hammer. It grows and shrinks on command, by the way. As George Carlin once said, you don't need to be Fellini to figure that one out. Indeed, if we take the giants as parents idea and watch Thor overcome them with his hammer, we get a sort of implication that it is masculine sexuality that allows us to take our parents' places. But the point is, it can be tricky being a person who reads a lot of old mythology and who has also collected a body of evidence that suggests that women are humans. This stuff is often dripping with misogyny, and it is too bad. Especially too bad here, because the Vikings weren't even all that terrible in this respect, and the emphasis in this story may have something to do with all of these stories being recorded by Christian monks. Indeed, National Geographic has a recent special called Viking Warrior Women, which I still need to get around to seeing, especially since it is hosted by Ella Al-Shamahi, a British archaeologist specializing in Neanderthals, who moonlights as a stand-up comic, and I am persuaded that she is real and not somebody that I've made up in my head. She's 5'10" and cosplays as Mr. Spock. We have lost the thread. Wow. While I'm on the subject of whether there's any reason to treat other people who aren't white men decently, let's stop off at a moment at the recent appropriation of Norse mythology by white supremacists. Leaving aside the fact that these stories actually have a higher ratio of real dick jokes than, say, the Koran, the only reason that you would take these stories as white nationalist is because they were Northern European. The Vikings traveled over huge areas of the world and met many of its people, and nowhere in their myths do foreigners show up as inferior or inhuman. I'm not saying the Norse weren't at all racist. They probably were. White people will do that. But these were not stories about racism. And I very much doubt that any of my viewers are white nationalist Odin worshippers. But if you are, stop it. You're wrong about this mythology. If you need stories, go write your own, presumably in all caps with a lot of spelling mistakes. Anyway, these are not the only stories of Thor fighting giants. There's one where he fights the giant Hrungnir, who uses a giant whetstone. There are a lot of whetstones in these. Maybe they made up stories while they were sharpening things and just had really bad imaginations. In another, the giant Geirröd forces Loki to bring Thor to him without his strength-enhancing belt and gloves, and so Thor borrows somebody else's strength-enhancing belt and gloves, which sounds like super lazy storytelling. And that is because it is. But then, on the other hand, solving problems by asking for help is not too bad of a moral. But alas, we do not have time to tell every single Thor versus Giants story tonight. No, we must stop at the end, at Ragnarok. I've spoken about it a lot recently, the first part of this trilogy, which was live, and then later in this live stream series also. So I will not belabor it further, but this is okay because actually the Giants have a fairly minor role in it. Mostly the villains here are the serious monsters, the giant wolves and serpents and the living dead and such. There are just a few giants to be seen. The aforementioned living dead ride forth on the largest ship ever made, Naglfar, made from the finger and toenails of the dead, which does sound awfully scary, albeit in a way that doesn't really make any sense. And they are joined on this boat by the frost giants, entities that combined the concepts of cold and big. And then on the other side of the coin were the fire giants who rode across Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connected the worlds, breaking it beneath them. They are led by Surtur, who stood guard at the beginning of all things, and who now, at the end, once all of the various god versus horror battles of Ragnarok are over and the gods and monsters alike are all dead, raises his sword and its flame flares out wider and wider, burning the entire world to ash, nothing but ash, and so the curtain is rung down. And a new world then dawns, one without giants or the old gods. And so it is that so it is for the frost giants and the fire giants. Nobody says anything here about the wind giants or the gum giants. Here in the real world, the Norse giants ceased to be a thing, but they did have descendants of a sort, and these were the trolls. Now, these days, that word could mean anything from colossal ogres to goblin-y things underneath bridges importuning goats to this bunk right here to people trying to make strangers angry on the internet because the problem with the internet is that people are not angry enough. The funny thing is, it seems that the trolls have always been like this, widely varied and with little consensus as to what they did or even looked like. And the folkloric trolls are often as much derived from the Svartalfar, the dwarves, as they are from the giants, the colossal enemies of the gods. So, to demonstrate this variation, here are some thumbnails of some later Scandinavian troll stories. In one, St. Olaf, who was named after the college, came upon a huge troll who asked what he was thinking of. What he was thinking of was how to build a new church without taxing the people. And so the troll offered to do this for him for the price of the sun and the moon, or else St. Olaf himself. St. Olaf agreed to this because he had the cunning stratagem of making the specifics of the church too grand to be buildable in the time allotted, and in this way he would at least get much of the church built without having to pay for it since it wasn't complete, because the most Christian saintly thing there is to do is to cheat your laborers. Too bad for St. Olaf, though, because soon before the time was up, the church was nearly done. And this all is a very direct descendant of the story of a disguised giant building a wall around Asgard. In that story, the giant was undone by Loki turning into a mare and seducing the giant's workhorse. But St. Olaf did not do this. Nobody knows why not, and instead walked around pondering his problem. Then he happened upon the sound of a child crying under a hill, and his mother saying, "Hush, hush, thy father, wind and weather, will come home in the morning, and bring with him the sun and the moon, or else St. Olaf himself." St. Olaf was thrilled to hear this, because knowing a troll's name gave you power over it. So he hastened to the church and told the giant, "Wind and weather, you've set the pinnacle crooked." Whereupon Wind and Weather fell to the ground and shattered into 1,000 pieces of flint. And that is the story of St. Olaf tricking someone into building him a church for free and then murdering him. In another story, a poor man named Plot, living in the town of Leen, was suddenly approached by a troll on the road, who told him, "Hark ye, Plot, tell your cat that Nuramura is dead." So he went home and told his cat this. Always take random instructions from trolls that you meet. His cat immediately jumped up on his hind legs and said, "What? Is Nuramura dead? Then I may go home at last as I please." As it turned out, the cat himself had always been a troll who had angered the father of his troll beloved, which father was named Nuramura, and so he was hiding from the older troll in cat form. So, if your cat runs off on its hind legs after receiving cryptic news, well, there you go. Troll. A lot of people, if they could take cat form, would just do so anyway, of course, so that they can hang around the house and be waited on hand and foot and complain about it not happening often enough. There's a story of a troll who lived in Kund, but who was driven out of it by a new church because trolls hate the sound of church bells. Sometime later, the troll came upon a traveler and asked where he was going. The traveler said he was going to Kund, and so the troll gave him an envelope and asked him to deliver it to the church there, but that he must not look inside it beforehand. The traveler agreed, because as we have seen, Scandinavians are just very agreeable people. Nevertheless, he took a rest and opened the envelope, overcome with curiosity, and water began to pour out of it and didn't stop, kept going and going, didn't stop until there was a whole lake there, a lake now called Lake Tees. And so Kund was saved by a man who couldn't follow simple instructions. This wasn't always a good idea, though. Once in the village of Englerup, a hill troll named Skind stole 3 of a man's wives in sequence. And some time later, the man was riding past a hill, and he saw a great many trolls dancing around it, and among them his 3 wives. He called out to his second one, Kirsten, who had been his favorite. And I guess that is real, but maybe be cool about it. And he called her over and over again, so much so that Skind came over to see what all the yelling was about. The man begged for Kirsten back, the other 2 could go to hell, and Skind eventually relented on one condition, that the man never ever tell his wife to hurry. He agreed. And guess what happened later? Go on, guess. She was spending too much time getting ready to go out one night, and he told her to hurry, and she disappeared forever, whisked off to under the hill. And so on. Clearly, we've moved from giants fully into the fairy realms now. There are stories about trolls exchanging their infants for human ones, about time passing in their realm much faster than the mortal one, and so on. Fairy stuff. We could say it's all a far cry from the god-battling colossi of old, but then, as we have seen, those stories were often deeply goofy by modern standards. And regardless of any of that, these stories of giants of fire burning the earth to ash, or maybe your cat is a troll, are testaments to the wonder and expansiveness of the human imagination, and also of its ability to tell fart jokes about eagles. Thank you. That's the show. Okay, hold on. Let me get some stuff arranged. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. So yes, as I said before, there is a donate button right below the screen here. You can also go to Venmo and find me as Matthew Kesson and donate there. And if you were sent here by the Norway House, please say so that we can track who was sent here by the Norway House, and they can get some money. Any money I get goes back into Monster Science. I've got a couple different plans. I've got a music thing going on and a Patreon thing going on that I could go that I need money for. So it all goes right back into the show. If you liked it, spread the word. Send people to Reverend Matt's Monster Science on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, or revmattsmonsterscience.com. I would like to thank tonight Boo Segerson, who was my pronunciation coach. Any mistakes are, of course, mine. Because there's some fairly simple rules, but boy, I needed some help. So that is the show, my friends and neighbors. I'm gonna give me some questions. What sort of questions do you have? Oh, there's my laptop. You can see it now. Now you can't. Let's see. If one were to invade the realm of fire, what is the largest pastry that could be baked therein? That's a very good question. They don't really have. That's an excellent question. That's possibly the most important question in the study of Norse mythology. I mean, really, just unbelievably infinitely huge. You know, I mean, there were 9 realms, and one of those was Midgard. The whole world was just one of the 9 realms, and so one can assume as a baseline that Muspel was the same size as the Earth, at least. And so that is the answer is a very, very big pastry is the answer to that. Let's see. Thoughts about Troll Hunter film? I love the Troll Hunter film. Have you seen the Troll? What do you mean? Okay. I have seen the Troll Hunter film. This concludes my thoughts about the Troll Hunter film because I just can't imagine seeing that film and not having a really great time. It's this film where there are modern trolls in Scandinavia, and there's various species, and some of them are huge, and some of them are two-headed, and there's this band of people who are hunting them in this sort of agent sort of way. And it's great. I recommend it. Any trolls in animal form at your house? I mean, we have a cat. And I have a leopard gecko named Linus. I feel like leopard gecko is kind of outside of the troll's usual thing. The cat, I don't know. The cat is big. My roommate's cat is the size of a rhinoceros, and that could mean troll ancestry, but I don't know. Do you have to be the god of cookies to make that pastry? Well, you don't have to be, but it helps. Did it seem accurate to stories, lore, film? Meaning Troll Hunter, was Troll Hunter accurate? It's almost impossible to be accurate about trolls. If it's humanoid and ugly and called a troll, then it's kind of a troll. Sometimes they're magical, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're smart, sometimes they're dumb. Sometimes they're tiny, sometimes they're huge. So Troll Hunter doesn't call on any extremely specific stories that I'm aware of, but it doesn't have to. Is the thing. Let's see. Search the gross, juicy mead shart story. All true. Admitted people. That fact alone is worth a tip to our stylish presenter. Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh no. I'm telling you true facts. Your roommate's cat has 1/32 troll on its mother's side. That's good. Thank you. I needed that information. That's very good. Mead. Yeah. Gods transformed into eagles doing mead charts. This is Norse religion. I mean, most religions actually have a lot of this stuff. Do we know where trolls' regeneration powers came from? I think it's actually. I'm not 100% certain, but I seem to remember reading something about trolls' regeneration powers being invented whole hog by Dungeons and Dragons. They wanted something special, and so they gave them regeneration powers. And I could be wrong about that. I'm not. I sometimes I'm right about things, like when I'm right about eagle charts, but I'm not 100% on that. But I feel like that might have actually been invented by Dungeons and Dragons. Random factoid: the dregs of the vats of the mead of poetry falling to Midgard. It's supposed that would give beach their color because that story wasn't random enough. Fair enough. It's because trolls are related to Wolverine, probably. Like you said, some of them are small. Just skim up while you're not saying things. Any other? I know there are more questions. I know it in my heart. I mean, this is nuts stuff, isn't it? This is amazing. Could Norse myths be cut to 33% length if Odin had invented the F5 rune? Yeah, well, Norse myths could be cut to 35% length if anybody had half a brain most of the time. Or if, if people weren't, here, have an eating contest with wildfire. No, wait, hold on. Hold on a second. Okay, have a running contest with thought. Wait. No, the F5 rune would have been great, but just paying attention to your surroundings would have done them a lot of good. We're just sort of an all in the whole milieu. I know it's amazing, isn't it? It's great. Have you read Norse mythology by Neil Gaiman? I have, and I am a proponent of it. It's quite good. I mean, Gaiman is a very good writer, and he researches the crap out of his stuff. And he has this sort of it's interesting. He's very good at sort of varying sort of his mood when he's telling stories about Thor being dressed as a girl. Then it's all very light and weird and dumb. And then when he talks about Ragnarok, it gets very heavy and very serious, and he's just terrific for that. Let's see. Do we ever see fire giants aside from Surtur or just him? Not by name. We only get Surtur as a named fire giant, and they stay in Muspel. They don't do anything. But we know that they're plural, at least, because they ride as an army over the Bifrost Bridge at Ragnarok. And that's really the only time we see any other than Surtur. But then we see a whole bunch of them, so that's a hell of a thing. Are there good primary sources about trolls, or are the sources mainly later Christian retellings? All of this, even the Norse stuff, before we move to trolls, is later Christian retellings, which is a shame. But that's showbiz sometimes. So no. And then trolls, like I got these troll stories from a Victorian book of fairy stories, and then there's just a million of them, but they're all post-Christian. So that's almost a shame. Matt, if you haven't, you should check out Zeus Grants Stupid Wishes. I like the sound of it very much. How would you say the legendary stories compared to the giants and trolls of Wagnerian opera? Well, they're bigger and they're weirder and they're dumber and they're a lot more fun. I mean, Wagner is famously sort of heavy. And people are dying. It's heavy times, but yeah, but it's love stories and heaviness, whereas here, of course, we're tying people's balls to goats, and I for one, I'm not much into the dick jokes myself, but the spirit of it I just enjoy quite a great deal more. Jeremy the fire giant never gets named in the myths because giant of the week just isn't worthy of Valhalla, which is simply the worst. Absolutely true. Yes. So yeah, no, even the Norse mythology comes from the Eddas, which were translated by monks, and so there's an unanswerable question of just how much Christianity bled into it. But that's Christianity for you. What's the difference between a Balrog and a fire giant? Like, legit, they seem the same thing. Well, of course, Tolkien drew heavily from Norse mythology, as we will be learning in 2 weeks when I will be doing my Weirdos of Middle-earth show as a live stream. Yeah, the Balrog is pretty fire giant-y, yes. Fire giants don't really have wings. There's nothing specifically about sword and whip or anything like that. But yeah, I would say, the Balrog is very, very fire giant-y in the first place, yes. Anyone else? What else we got? What else is happening? Yeah. thank you for the donations so far. Like I said, they go back into Monster Science, or they go to Norway House if they're for if they were sent by them. I also might spend some of it on one of those cameo.com things from Gates McFadden if I get enough. Probably I won't do that. Are there any more giants from Christianity you'd like to pull stories from? Well, I mean, there are in fact some giants in the actual Bible, Gog and Magog, and the whole thing with the Nephilim, where which isn't actually biblical, but sort of Christian folklore, where the angels come to Earth and breed with humans, and there were giants in the Earth in those days. It is biblical, actually, now that I think about it. I did the Book of Revelations a couple of weeks ago, and though there are tons of dragons and basilisks and stuff in the Bible, all the good ones really show up at Revelations, and a biblical monsters show would mostly be a repetition of the Revelations section. How tall you have to be to get into giant? Oh, thank you. How tall do you have to be to get giant status? I missed the first 10 minutes, so I apologize if you mentioned it. No, that's fair. I didn't mention it. And the thing about the gods about the giants is that sometimes the gods are attracted to them and marrying them, and this doesn't seem to be a problem, and they interact as though they're all exactly the same size. And another time, Thor and Loki are traveling, and they think they find a huge hole, and they sleep in it, and then they learn the next morning that it's a giant's mitten. So they vary wildly in size, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no this kind of giant is this size. No, they're just as big as the storyteller wants them to be. You mentioned Ratatosk in the previous lecture. It's worth checking out Volume 2 of The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, where she fights it. Awesome, good. Anything that mentions Ratatosk. For those of you who don't know, so Yggdrasil is the world tree. And at the bottom of the world tree, there's Nidhogg, who is a giant serpent dragon who gnaws at the roots of the world tree, but never finally kills. And at the top of the world tree, there is an eagle that does not have a name. Probably has a name, it's just been lost. And then there's a squirrel named Ratatosk who runs up and down the tree carrying nasty messages between Nidhogg and the eagle. And in some versions, he's making them up. He's just fomenting spite between the eagle and the serpent, just to amuse himself. And this is one of my favorite things in any mythology ever. Ratatosk talking smack in between the two creatures of Yggdrasil. It is the best. The giants clearly use the same size-changing technology as Cybertronians. Yeah, and that's actually a thing. Like giants, when we make things super gigantic, it is very consistent for inventors of giants to be very inconsistent about it. Like King Kong or Godzilla, if you look at them in various shots in their movies, they kind of change size if you really compare them carefully to their surroundings. Sometimes Kong seems like he's 20 feet tall. Sometimes he seems like he's maybe 50 feet tall. Godzilla is by standard is said to be 50 meters tall, but he's going to have to be smaller than that to walk down some of the streets. It is not done with scientific rigor, and that's why I have come among you, is to change this, to fix this. So yes, more questions. Norse mythology is great. It's unusual for me to do. I haven't done a whole. Oh, okay. Actually, a note more than a question. So that Bojo from Ojibwe legend was a giant. He's a shapeshifter, so he does what he wants. It said that the mesas and sills of the Sibley Peninsula in Ontario is sleeping maybe forever. The legend behind it is really cool, actually. Yeah, Bojo is a fascinating legend, but I won't get too far into it right now. Yeah, giants are all over the place, and like I said, sometimes they're heroes and sometimes they're evil. Like. Yeah, I mean, I think literally every culture that tells stories about imaginary beings at all includes giant people, and like I said, that is thought to be because of memory of our childhood, and both that and the gods are memories of our childhood, because humans are this creature that spends, like most animals, like when you see like a deer get born, it comes flying out and then stands up and runs off, but because of the thinness of the human birth canal, because of the way humans are built upright, we have to be born much earlier than other animals are in our development, and so we spend this outrageously helpless time that other animals don't, and where we have to learn things, and so just deep, deep memory of this unbelievable helplessness causes a lot of weird problems for us. I think, anyway. Your Alf slide made me want for an Alf Monster Science segment. Well, I got news for you. You're not getting it. I might do I might do I could potentially do like a weird 1980s Monster Science and have Alf in it. And I do have a Christmas Monster Science that I've done once and will do again. I don't know, some time of the year. I can't decide which. And that actually has the Alf Christmas special, which is terrible. So there, yes, he did one in Christmas lecture, and it was fantastic. Well, very kind of you. The line, but life being misery and existence and a veil of tears, according to the Christmas special, as does every Alf episode, only in the show don't tell sort of way. Yep. TV 1980s monster sounds pretty amazing. I might have to. I mean, I could probably do TV 1980s monsters. I'd probably be more interested in doing 1980 TV and movie 1980s monsters. I actually did a 20-minute 1980s monster movie piece for the Science Museum a couple of years ago, and see, then I could do Gremlins, man, Gremlins. So yes. How about Eco Turso from Finnish mythology? Finnish mythology is bananas. Finnish mythology is made up by. I mean, you thought all this stuff was weird. Finnish mythology is made by space aliens, and I've been distracted because somebody said Manimal. Beauty and the Beast. I talk about Beauty and the Beast in my Valentine's Day show. Actually, Kolchak, the Knight's Daughter. Well, I'm not going to do another. I'm not going to do a show about giants in 80s TV. That would never work. But yes, Manimal. I could do a whole show about Manimal. There's only 9 episodes of Manimal, and I could talk about each of them for a couple minutes, for at least 7 minutes, and then nobody would like it or watch any of my shows ever again. So I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I would certainly talk about Manimal. I'd probably people ask me sometimes if robots are monsters, and I'm like, sort of. I probably couldn't do an 80s monster show, especially one that focused at all on TV, without giving you some Small Wonder. Small Wonder is, oh my God. Between Small Wonder and Manimal, 1980s television was a holocaust. What if you did a show on urban cryptid comedians? Tricky. I mean, I could just talk about my history for an hour. Anyone can do that. But again, audience demand, I don't know. I just don't know. But yeah. Thank you again. Were the people who made Manimal monsters? No. Monsters are made up stuff. Humans are never monsters. I like monsters, is the point. And when humans are doing things that renders them to be monsters, that's what I'm getting out of. You know what I mean? That's what I'm getting away. Vicky is my homegirl. Well, that's Vicky being the robot on Small Wonder. Small Wonder, if you haven't seen Small Wonder, it is the worst television show ever made. And I'm not kidding around. The only person who doesn't completely phone it in is the little girl who plays the robot, and it's kind of tragic. You can talk about Mac and Me in an 80s show. I sure can, and probably would. I mean, because that's a whole thread. E.T. and then its antecedents, such as Mac and Me. Yeah, I might do an 80s show. I'm glad there's enthusiasm for that. Like I said, I've got the movie part already. I've already got 20 minutes worth of the movie part, and I only just touch on Gremlins and all of its antecedents. You think Mac and Me as an antecedent of ET? I mean, we're talking Gremlins. We're talking about Ghoulies and what are the Munchies? Remember that? No, weird. Would love a show based on the top 10 monsters you would want to transform into. I do have a top 20 monsters show, and implicitly I would want to transform into any of them, or who you would play card games with. I mean, I would probably play card games with like griffins and stuff, with animals that can't actually play card games. That way I would win. I am not good at card games. Let's see. Critters, Leprechaun. Yeah, Leprechaun. That is a rich. There's a lot of stuff going on in the Leprechaun movies. The Leprechaun movies are kind of in this whole genre that has come to pass over the last 15 or 20 years of making terrible movies on purpose, and some of them, I mean, I'm trying to get my hands on good copies of the Sharktopus films because that's what I'm talking about. But other than that, I don't know. I find it all a little heavy and tedious. Leprechaun in the Hood. Yes, I have in fact seen Leprechaun in the Hood. It involves the titular leprechaun played by Warwick Davis, rapping limericks Coolio is in it, if I remember correctly. Coolio is certainly in the Sci-Fi Channel original Pterodactyl. Bad stuff happens sometimes, is my point. So yes, we've got this is lovely, and I'm into it. But does anyone have anything they need to know about the Norse mythology, since that is, in fact, our topic of the night? Yeah, it's the first time I've done a trilogy of anything. I'm doing another sequel next week, where I'm doing Better Armageddons Than This to the modern years, where it's all the fictional stuff, the nuclear mutants and the zombies and all kinds of stuff like that. And I warn you right now that there's so much of this stuff that all I can do is pick my favorites. With some eye towards a basic overview of the genre, but you think I can hit all of them? Disabuse yourself. Was there any mythological cross-pollination with the Greco-Roman mythic titans? Hard to say. I mean, it's certainly a similar story. The giants, that the gods have to overcome older giants to make their place in the world. That could be because the story is, has a psychological resonance, or it could be because of cross pollination. They didn't live that far away from each other. And then there's other things like Hel, which is both the goddess of the underworld and the underworld itself. There's clearly some cross pollination between that and the Mediterranean religion word Hel. So that cross pollination certainly exists. The Norns, as being the three weavers of fate, are extremely similar to the fates, to the Greek three fates, who are certainly past, present, and future, young, motherly, and old. So some kind of crossover is certainly occurring. So it is very possible that there was some crossover. One thing to bear in mind is that, of course, the Vikings, even though we've lost most of their stuff, the Vikings were active in the Middle Ages, which is, of course, hundreds of years later after the classical period, after the High Greek mythology period. So there's plenty of time for it to bleed upward. Thoughts on the theory that Jotun were representative of aspects of the untamed and deadly wilderness versus the parents' theory? Well, yeah, don't take my advocacy of the parents' theory as an end-all be-all. The thing about any of these mythical creatures, any symbolic entity, is that there's a bunch of stuff you can do. You can put onto there. I talked about Mjolnir as a phallus, but it's also a hammer. So yeah, certainly one thing that giantness also does, especially with giant animals, especially, is take anything that is scary and magnify it. And so you get the fire giants and the frost giants, and the fire and the frost is not about parenthood. It's about nature and its wild power. So I think that theory is true. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with all of these. It's never simple. So yeah, I'm all for that theory, is the point. Are the earlier parts of the trilogy online? Yes and no. The first one I did live. The first one, which was about Fenrir and Jormungand and all the big Norse monsters, I did live. I'll probably record it eventually, but there is not a recording of it right now. The second one, Magical Weirdo Creatures from the Northlands, which is about the folkloric fairy creatures that came afterwards, is on my YouTube, Matthew Kesson on YouTube. So go find that. He's a scholar and a comedian, not an internet commenter. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of complexity to all of this. All right. What else we got? Anything? This is fun. Isn't this fun? Thank you for joining me. This does me such good to do these things and to talk to you guys afterwards. And thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Exxon. I have fun. Yeah, tomorrow. Yeah, next week's going to be, like I said, next week is Better Armageddons Than This, Part 2, The Modern Years. Nuclear mutants, zombie apocalypses. Oh, thank you. All kinds of stuff like that. So tune in for that. Tell your friends. It's by popular demand. So bring people along. So thank you all so much, and we'll call that a night. And I'll see you all next week.